Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's study session for the Pasco School District Board of Directors. Today we are going to be going over our annual goals for, this would be for the calendar year 2019, right? Okay, so when we met 2 weeks ago, we came up with some ideas, just kind of brainstorming about different things that we could set as objectives, and I think today our goal is to walk out of here with 3 to 5 that we will focus on during this next year. So each of you should have in front of you a list, and it's identical to the list that's, the big list that's up there. And I think we've all had a chance to read through this, so we can go down through this, and why don't we just do that? We'll go down through this list, and if anybody has any comments on any of these, we'll take those. If you want to advocate for one of these, then that would be a great thing to do at this time. So, okay, sound fair enough? We'll just go starting at the top. So, topic number 1, we've got parent communication. So listed here, we've got topic and then category. We've got some details, and then we've got existing department priority, which I think means that our administrative team has set that as a priority for them, right? Okay, so parent communication, this falls under the category of community engagement. Establish a standard bank of communications that would come from the district office on a predictable and replicable, is that a word? Must be. Replicable schedule. So, any comment on that? Would that just be like written communication? I mean, when I say written, whether it's Facebook or something like that, we're not talking about.
It could be a bank of print materials that we identify by month. These certain print materials should go out. It could be a set of like a messaging campaign, for example. Like we identify every August. These are the bank of messages that will go out via Facebook, et cetera, et cetera.
Scott, I think that was your suggestion, so I don't know if I captured that.
Yeah,
the way
I
you
think
intended.
so. I mean, I don't know if it would be it seems like it's just should be part of the everyday work without the board having to put sticky notes on it.
All right, so we've got it identified there. Board meetings, so we've got here live stream board meetings, and I think this is on our agenda for today. Yeah. So we will have a further discussion about that, but certainly we can talk about live streaming our board meetings and potentially making that a priority this year. So I know, Aaron, you've talked about that.
Yeah, I think that one, I mean, to me, and we'll have, like you mentioned, the presentation tonight, but I don't think that has to be an ongoing priority. Essentially, we just have to have the willpower as a school board, and we purchase the equipment, it's set up, and then it rolls. So, I mean, it doesn't need to be an ongoing priority. It's just more of a one-time, let's do it. That's it. So I don't think it has to be an ongoing objective for next year. It would just be something that we would need to give direction on and move forward, and then it would be done.
Yeah, so just, maybe I should preface this. These are things that we've identified, not necessarily that any of them would, or that all of them would rise to the level of a priority, but things as a board that we've identified that we want to at least track somewhere and see if we can't make some improvement on. And just because it's not a priority doesn't mean that it won't get any attention. So. All right, use of existing buildings in lieu situations. So so Richland has a building that they have replaced essentially with a new building, but they've not torn it down. They've left it for an early learning center, and we would get a report on that and potentially look at doing some of those same types of things with our buildings. Any discussion on that?
I think it's just part of should become, even if it's not a board priority, part of our normal operating practice, because it ties into our long-term planning. And if we're going to continue to talk about new in lieu, which we've been talking about for 3 or 4 years, and we pick a school that's going to be new in lieu, we should think about, even if it's not early learning, how we can use that as a district, because it comes off our student per square foot, our inventory as a district, and so we should think about if we want to use that for early learning or something else, we need to put that in our long-term plan so that we'll have to replace that school. We should be determining if more schools can go on that same piece of property, or we need to get more property in the same area as that.
Okay. Any further discussion on that?
I think it'd be nice to get the full report from MGT before we launch into something like that. I think it is critical. I don't know if I need this closer. I do believe it is critical that we do things like that before we even think about the next bond, so that we can make, first of all, that we can plan for bonds more than, 6 to 12 months in the future, and then so that we can look at some of these things before we even go to a bond. So yeah, I think it's critical. I don't know if it's time to do that quite yet.
Okay. Next one, education and communication. This falls under the facilities category, and this is basically increased community awareness of district facility needs. Probably putting together some kind of a plan to do that, and then rolling it out. Any discussion? All right, innovative school models. Explore the possibility of building a small innovative high school and/or adding homeschool partnerships, or a homeschool partnership facility. So I think this one is also on a future board meeting as well. But
Yeah, so I can comment on that, since, I kind of see these 4 facility ones, I think they could kind of be combined, and I think that should be a priority in the next year, because we're planning on having kind of the final master 10, 15-year plan, and I think these capture some things that we want to be included in that. So the next one, as far as the MGT report and facilities needs, these last 3 that we've talked about, I think should be kind of part of that, and that should happen in the next year if we kind of follow that timeline.
yeah. So that's one of our goals this year, is to get a long-term facilities plan, and I think each one of these could potentially be a component of that. So, anyway, those are 4 under facilities. Moving on, equity. We've got, this falls under organization and culture. Define what equity means in Pasco. And I will tell you, I am on the WASDA board, and we had a retreat this last weekend where we talked about equity. And I don't think we even touched the surface in our 8-hour session there. But there's a lot of ideas out there on equity, I will just tell you right now. So I think it would be good for us to talk about that and define what that means, and how we're going to implement that in Pasco. So we've talked about, I think we did have a study session planned, or a retreat of some kind planned on that, but we've put that off for a little bit. Okay.
And WASDA is happy to help and support with that, and we actually have some focus group data from the Student Advisory Council that we did last year. We did some focus groups with students around their educational experience that Tricia is planning to use as a launch point for that dialogue. So there's a plan to address it. We just need to get it rescheduled. That's appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's important to us as a district, and that we identify what equity means. I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and if we have some kind of direction, I don't think it's just going to be us as a board, but it's probably going to be a broader group that helps us work through that. Any other discussion on equity?
Like Dr. Richardson said, that some of these could be rolled up under facilities. I think a couple that we have under here could be rolled up under equity, like the last one, access to enrichment experiences, and the one we're going to talk about here in a minute, support for students who need extension beyond grade level content. They could all be rolled up into under equity if that's important to us.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think even the facilities that we just talked about can be part of that discussion, and facilities really illustrates well what equity is and what it isn't. Clearly not every student across the district is going to have the same school built in 2017. They're not going to have the same STEM school, the same bilingual program available, age of the building, the same quality of, I mean, there's so many, so it doesn't mean the same. It means, but facilities really plays into that, right? And so if there's some certain level of, and this obviously we could talk about for a long time, but we've had some of these discussions in terms of Stevens rebuild and middle school 4. It really plays into that because we're building another school, which we certainly need, and we're rebuilding on a site that's smaller, and so it really kind of illustrates some of those points. And so there's zero chance they're going to be the exact same, but that would be equal. But equity, we should make sure that that's addressed and that we do the best we can for all the students. And so, anyways, that's a. But I agree with Mr. Lerman. We can kind of tie in a number of these priorities to equity because it plays into a lot of these other objectives and goals.
Yeah, I think along those same lines. When I think of equity, so I think some people would define equity as the students who need the most get the most, and the students who need who are advanced don't get much at all because they don't need it, in theory. But I'm not sure I subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to that. I think every student should be given an opportunity to achieve what they can, and we just need to make sure that the resources are distributed equitably. And so, but I'm sure there's others who don't share that view, and I would like to have the discussion.
Yeah, I agree with that view exactly. The view that you said initially is absolutely not what equity is, because that's not how it should be. Every student, I think, to summarize it, it should be every student receives the assistance and the resources they need to progress to their potential. Right. And so that's a much different mindset than we just put a bunch of resources into the 5 students that need the most help, or that's right. A much different way of looking at it than when we say every single student deserves resources and assistance to reach their potential, because all students are going to be across this huge spectrum of where they're at.
Yep. Okay. Substitute compensation. This is establish a substitute pay rate that is commensurate with market value of teachers. So, and I think that's something that's important to us. I don't know that we can make that a priority necessarily, but it's certainly something that needs to be rolled in and considered somewhere. Any other commentary on that? All right, STAR assessment. Identify a standardized report that is clear and transparent for parents. So I think we had some discussion on this one last time.
Yeah, that's another one I think that in and of itself doesn't have to be a priority, but combining that with, parent-teacher conferences or some sort of parent involvement initiative, I think would be good. Some of these could be combined, and making sure we're increasing that across the district.
Yeah, I think, I don't remember exactly what the discussion was, but I think it was identifying some way that we can clearly help parents understand where their students are, whether that's, and part of that's going to be in a parent-teacher conference and in the assessments.
Yeah, the parents have to understand.
Yeah. That's something that's consistent. All right, parent-teacher conferences establish consistency in the information that is shared with parents during conferences.
Yeah, multiple of these that we just talked about could be rolled into one, and when it comes time to vote, I'd vote for it and would hope that, all of these communication with parents could all be rolled into one broader, communicate better with parents about what's going on with their students, whether it's number 1, which says establish a standard bank of communications that would come from the district. That rolls up with consistency in what's shared at conferences and how conferences happen, reports on STAR assessments and other student achievement, they all roll into communicating better with parents about where their student is.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Lehrman, and we could add to that that we don't have on the list, but with school starting, there have been some concerns about students being moved from schools, whether or not they're special ed or just, I know at some of our schools, they've had large grade levels, and some students have been moved and the communication wasn't. So all of those things, like Mr. Lehrman said, we could add that to that group, to some sort of communication priority.
You know, the
Okay.
issue that I find with all of this is that when we start to add all of these, some of these look like they might, oh yeah, let's just do this. But something as simple as identifying a standardized report that is clear and transparent for parents for the STAR assessment, I don't think that's just like, okay, tomorrow, you know, let's talk about it, and tomorrow let's do this. The student achievement, establish a consistency in the information that is shared with parents during conferences. If we're going to do something like that district-wide, you're going to have to go up against principals and teachers who've done it a certain way a long time. It's going to require a lot of buy-in. It's going to require a lot of education. It's going to require a lot of time. So if we're going to take the approach of rolling a lot of these into one, then we might just choose one area that we are going to focus on. The facilities, let's roll them all into one, do that, and just choose the facilities this year. Or the equity, roll all those into one and just focus on equity. That would be my recommendation, simply because then these things really get the attention they need, and we're not asking for such a huge haul. So I do think we need to be aware of that. I don't know what each one takes, and it might be kind of nice to say, okay, this one is, you know, I think we had something like that. This is a 1, this is a 5, whatever, so that we know, okay, we need to keep this around with what we have of the superintendent's time. We need to keep this around whatever number we have of her time, or reprioritize some of the things that are already taking up her time. So I do think we need to be aware of that, and I don't know how to best go about that, but that's just an idea.
That's a good point, and I think, you know, one of the things that I've struggled with, you know, as a parent and on the school board is kind of what Ms. Phillips is talking about, as far as, you know, what is the right, how many things should be just standardized every school? This is exactly how it should be, and there should not be flexibility from school to school. And how much leeway should a principal have to do things their own way, and the teachers there in their school their own way? Because we want to enable creativity, but we also want to have a standard that everyone should have the expectation that this is, you know, an expectation. So I think this is where Ms. Whitney and the leadership, you know, where they come in and knowing the principles and knowing more details, what's a reasonable balance. But I think sometimes that it is not quite balanced. You know, as we hear concerns, there's some things that maybe should be standardized that aren't, and some things that where flexibility is allowed, where it's good, and sometimes it's bad, and creates things that maybe are not equitable. But so, for example, the way I would view the STAR assessment, so I think I brought this one up, and to me that would be just super easy, what I had in my mind, and there's other things, you know, that maybe would be harder, but on the STAR assessment, there's different things that you can put on the report that goes to teachers, and some of my students, it said where they fall, grade level, where they rank nationally, state, in their school, that type of thing, so that it's like, oh, okay, this is how they're doing. And some of my students, literally, I had no idea what their numbers meant. They were numbers, and there was so that column wasn't included. So in my mind, it would be just as simple as saying, you know what, district standard, every report needs to have a column that specifies this is where they fall, this is where that ranks, so that a parent can say, yep, Layla's, you know, right on level, she's a little bit ahead of grade level, she ranks 88th percentile on her math. Because if you don't have any of that information, as a parent, you get that report and it just doesn't mean anything other than you can see if their numbers went a little bit up or a little bit down, but are they doing really super awesome for their grade level, or where they need to be, or are they going up but they're still 2 grade levels behind? And see, it needs to be super clear on the report. So to me, that would be something in my mind that's easy. You just standardize this column, these 2 columns have to be on all reports, so that we are not hiding or minimizing anyways, so that's an example. But for some of more of the details, that, you know, we expect the administration to help kind of what would be just very doable and what would be more of a lift like that.
And the administration would be the best to know that, because sometimes I feel like it's like, oh, that's simple, go do this.
And then it's like, oh,
And then
no,
it's
it's
like,
not.
oh my goodness, that's huge, you know, it's hard, and I'm sure you've seen that in your practice. Some things seem simple, but are much more complex. It would just be nice to have a weight by each of these things, so we can. I mean, that was the whole purpose of that whole master plan and what they were doing. And I think in order to intelligently make these decisions, we've got to figure out what weight we can put on this administration.
So let's move through the rest of these. It looks like some of these we can kind of combine together. And I think we'll prioritize them, and then we'll let Michelle decide or determine how much time each of them is going to take. We may only have time for one, but if it's a big enough priority, then we'll get that done. If it's things that are simple, we can do more than one. But anyway, so high school credit opportunities at the middle school level. So increase those opportunities. Looks like we've got foreign language under there potentially. And I think there was a little issue with math. It's been a little bit of a concern. Get those standardized.
And I think if I understood what you said, Scott, it was making sure those opportunities available to all kids, not more opportunities for a few kids, but more opportunities for all kids is what
Right.
kind of I understood, so.
Okay. Support for students who need extension beyond the grade level content. So those who are ahead, I think giving them opportunities rather than just leaving them to their own devices if they finish early. So, all right. One-to-one technology initiative.
That could go
report
under
to the
equity as
board.
well. If we are defining equity as making sure every child reaches their full potential, that perfectly fits there. Anyway, you can go
And I
on.
think so we've got to check by that, so we're working
The
on that.
one-to-one initiative is a big lift at the middle school level this year, and we'll go into the high school level next year. So that's a
Okay,
Mark Garrett
Yeah.
priority initiative already.
okay. All right, support with testing. Identify ways to support teachers and students during state testing windows to minimize impact to instruction. So I think somebody talked about this, was it? Oh, yeah.
And I
About
think
some of
the
these kids
students
take.
weighed in on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was the one who talked about that. Yeah, I just think
Okay.
it's time that, more time teaching equals better test scores. I mean, time on task, there's just a lot of research around that, and if we could buy some of that time back in different ways so that we can continue to teach and challenge our kids rather than devoting the month to testing, that, I think that could help our kids do better. And
Okay. Students' work, increase expectations for students. So encourage them to apply their effort the first time rather than thinking they're going to get to do it over again. All right, standards-based grading, building a consistent practice around when students retake exams. So this, I think,
Those two tie together, I
They
think,
do.
yeah.
Go
That's
together.
more.
Okay,
And they actually tie together under the umbrella of standards-based grading, which is an enormous concept and lift for the organization, so it's big.
are we working on that? Are we moving that direction?
We have pockets that are working on, we have pockets that have implemented, but there isn't a consistent practice. It hasn't been a priority district-led focus.
So that kind of rolls up into consistency and other things there.
Yeah, but that whole concept of standards-based grading is it's significant.
Big
Big
lift.
lift, yeah.
All right, so let's go through the others and then we can come back to that. So science equipment, standardize and ensure all classrooms have access to the science equipment necessary for students to fully access the science standards. Okay, and then school improvement planning, align the building level school improvement planning process with board level outrageous outcomes. So that one's getting some attention now. Access to enrichment experiences, provide consistent hallmark experiences to schools across the district. So, and I think, Scott, you've talked about that when we talked about that with the equity piece, I think. Okay. So, having gone through all of these, is there any that anybody wants to? So any ways of combining these? Anything that stands out to you as a really high priority? I think, did we not talk about putting the school director districts on here?
We did, this just is the wrong version, I added it to the one that I
Okay.
sent you, I apologize.
All right,
And that
no
one
worries.
is already scheduled for a board meeting. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So the other one that we talked about that came up in our meeting last week, it wasn't in our study session, but at some point, we're going to have to address school director districts, voting districts, where we have, whether we are, so right now, we're all at large, and we could have 5 directors living in the same block potentially. But that's, with some of the Voting Rights Act legislation that's been passed and is being considered, we probably need to look at that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's on the agenda for us, like a report from Sarah, I want to say, beginning of October, like within the next 3 or 4 meetings.
So this is a good discussion because, a lot of these things, we were kind of teasing out what needs to be an objective or goal for next year and what is something that just needs to be done, like the live stream board meetings, like I mentioned, that we just do that one time, it's done, an objective. And that could be the same thing. It sounds like we need to have a report, a discussion, and make a decision as a board. I mean, that doesn't need to be a district admin-led year-long objective do you know what I mean? But it's good that we're planning for these things and talking about it, I think.
So I think any of these things will take time. I don't know how much. I don't know what the district involvement would be on these voter districts. Is it just a matter of saying yes or no and then turning it over to the city or the county, or is it, I don't know how much time that is. And so I think those are the kinds of things that, is it a priority? Because we as a board have to initiate that. The school district can make the recommendation, but.
I think the impact of that one would primarily be Sarah, and it would be an interface with a third party and potentially the city and county, depending on the requirements. But I don't, the depth of that's not going to be multiple staff members.
Okay. All right. So looking at all of those up there, is there any that potential grouping that we've talked about?
So I would combine the first one, parent communication, the STAR assessment standardized report that's clear and transparent for parents, and the parent-teacher conferences, establishing consistency. So I would combine all 3 of those into a parent communication engagement priority. And I think the first one was the one Ms. Whitney kind of said that could be detailed, and so that one I can see how that maybe be more involved. But the other 2 are more just kind of a decision in my mind, again, and they can correct us but to me, those are some things that we just decide, this is a standard, and we can
Erin, I
make
hate
sure.
to interrupt you, but I want to follow what you're saying. The first one, parent communication, the next one, STAR assessment, and what was the third?
Parent-teacher conferences.
Okay.
The idea of all 3 of those is that parents are just better communicated with, engaged, and know what how their children are doing. I have people tell me frequently, well, the teacher said that they're fine, or I'm not worried about them. What does that even mean? Like, where are they at? And so that's great that you're not worried, and that's great that they're doing fine, but what does that even mean? Where do they fall in their progress and in their performance? So I think those are the types of things that I want every student and every parent to know exactly how their child's performing, what their strengths are, where they're behind or ahead of grade level or expectation, and we need to not be shy to communicate that to parents.
I would agree.
So I would combine those 3. And the degree of the first one, Ms. Whitney kind of mentioned that could be more involved. We would let them determine how far to take that. I don't, like we have the Positively Pasco. Is that a monthly thing? I saw it sporadically, so I can never pin down when it came out, but things like that, all of that kind of plays in together.
Yeah, I look at the parent communication on the top being very broad, not just about grades and student achievement, but I would definitely lump the STAR assessment and parent-teacher conferences in what we're communicating to parents about the progress of their students. I think definitely put those together and be consistent in that. But I think the top one would be broader. I mean, certainly that's falls under communication, those two. But
I think the top one, when I was talking about it, important things are just managing communications with real important stuff like transitions. Parents are constantly writing on social media or asking us or emailing us, when are my kids going to get their schedule? It's their first year in 7th grade, or it's their first year in 9th grade, or when does kindergarten have their kinder roundup? Sometimes that stuff doesn't come until a week before school, and people are asking that question for 5 or 6 weeks before school. Is there a way that we can say, hey, you're going to get your schedule a month before, and we're going to have some kind of communication with you? At the 7th grade level, I have people going, how did my kids get put into these classes? What is this math thing? You know, they got some kind of elective, and we don't understand any of that, how this schedule works. And they go in, the kids go in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days before school and get a schedule, and they go, how come I got this elective and my friend got this other one? You know, unless it's banned or something like that, but all the other electives, how did my schedule get made? Kids don't know that, parents don't know that, they don't know when they're going to get their schedules. So those are the communications I was thinking about, not we're going to tell everyone that they need to announce their PTO meeting X days before it or something, but district-wide things that really impact kids' transitions and communications with parents. That's what I thought would be lumped into number one there.
Yeah, I agree with all those sentiments. I think that fits in good with the parent communication, the other one, so that it doesn't seem like as heavy of a lift, but just having some of those things standardized. Kindergarten registration for school, just so parents kind of know what the expectations are, that they have some expectations, like, okay, I know that we're going to get this, we're going to get this. Transitions is another one that we mentioned that I would add to that Mr. Lerman mentioned, because that's an issue at the start of the school year frequently.
And it becomes a lot bigger issue now that we're talking 24 credit requirements and all these different pathways that a 9th grader can take. You need to tell the parents and the kid and have that meeting earlier so that they can see their options, maybe think about it, because that impacts their schedule for the next 4 years. It has to be lots of communication and well thought out, and it'd be nice to have a schedule so that parents can know when that's going to happen, and students.
And I have to agree wholeheartedly. I'm on, anyway, 7 children in the school system right now, and just spent quite a bit of time in a counselor's office trying to figure out why my child was placed where they were without a lot of answers. So I do think that we could get better at this, and I do think it's critical to the, I think it helps student achievement as well, when we know why and where and how, and we're making sure that the kids are in places that they can excel the very best. So.
okay.
So this might be a stupid question, but why isn't the student going into 9th grade, why aren't the parents and the student making their records known in 8th grade at the end of the year?
They do more in the 9th grade. From my experience, they do very little in middle school, in my experience. So middle school's
But
kind
in
of.
8th grade going into 9th grade, why aren't they having something?
Yeah,
to
no,
So
say?
I
they
agree.
do. The
They do.
high school counselors come down to 8th grade. They do a day where they talk about all the clubs and electives, et cetera. But the counselors are doing that with the students. I don't know that there is a.
No, they do with the parents as well. At least they didn't chew on it. So the parents
I'm
would come
talking
in.
at the
oh.
middle school.
Oh, okay.
At the middle school.
So at the middle school, there's
Nope.
not a
No.
parent night
No.
for parents of outgoing 8th graders. The interface happens between the counselor and the student. So Scott's point is that when they get then to 9th grade, it's typically in the fall, right before 9th grade, when those things are happening.
the schedule
So
comes out,
the
parents are
timeliness
going.
of it, to be able to
Yes.
think about it and ask questions, I think is your
Yeah,
point.
and again, with the 24 credit thing coming up, we looked at all those paths,
Yeah.
right? Where if I take this path and my student's advanced and does this, they're able to go to Running Start and do all these other
Right.
things later on in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Well, if you don't have that communication early in 8th grade, or at least enough time before 9th grade for parents and students to think about all the implications on it, all of a sudden they're halfway through their 9th grade year, all the way through their 9th grade year, and they're going, I want to do this path. And the parents go, well, I wasn't even aware of that. When did we talk about that?
Well, that's
Oh,
just
we
what I'm
didn't.
saying. Why
Yeah.
aren't we doing it in 8th grade?
No, I agree with Ms.
We
Lang.
totally
we need to.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does need
Just
to
for
have
some
some
clarity around.
And it's the
need
same
to.
thing in 6th grade, or if we're switching
Right.
in 5th grade, why aren't we making
We
that
should be.
schedule?
Well,
We should.
so as an organization, we recognize that transition is a weakness. And that's one of the areas that has been identified by Eric Bowles and what's called the Learning Supports Team as an area that we need to focus on. So it's been identified. I didn't clearly understand, Scott, that's what you meant by parent communication.
Yeah.
Should there have been one that said transition specifically, I would have marked a check mark
Okay.
because Eric and his
Sorry.
team is looking at it. Don't be sorry. It's no, I mean, that's why we're having the conversation. But I agree with you. I think we could be doing transitions better, and it's getting more and more complicated. So doing it earlier and more often is better
Yeah,
when it's
that's great.
complicated.
So
And they're
that-
big life decisions.
That helps focus,
Yeah.
number one, so that it's not communicate everything to everybody all the time.
Yeah.
It was
And I know that
more
there's
focused
been,
on that.
I've heard lots of things about registering for kinder and getting your kids registering early for kinder, and I don't have anybody anywhere near being in kinder, and I've heard about it in the media and out in the paper and all this kind of stuff, so I know that communication has been out there.
Yeah, that one's out there.
But
Yeah,
we don't have
But we
any-
don't have a standard, yeah,
It's
this
not a
is the same
standard.
thing.
It happens different times at different schools, right?
I mean, when your child's born, you know that you're gonna need to register them, right? But we don't have a standard like by this day, and if you register by this day, you'll get your, you know, like, there's not really an
So
expectation.
here's what happens is a school puts out, we're gonna have a kinder roundup or whatever they're calling it, right? And they go to that at school A, and at school B, they're going, you already did that? Two parents are talking, well, I haven't heard anything about my school yet. They look online and they look on PSD, and they need to contact their own school. It's just not, it's not consistent that here's the timeline when we do these things.
So that concern was brought up last year, Scott. I think actually you and I talked about it. And at the end of last year, we implemented a big event at Edgar Brown
Okay.
to kind of do and I can have Christy do a
So
report.
that's a good.
It
that's
was
good-
a fairly successful event and one that they learned a lot
Yeah.
about. And she could give you numbers in terms of how many people registered. But the concept was that we start to establish this community event as something that's predictable and replicable, so that people know that on X Saturday, like the first Saturday in May is Kinder Roundup at Edgar Brown. We're going to rally as a community around all of our kindergartners who go there. They're going to start their career at Edgar Brown, just like they'll graduate from there, and make it a big community celebration. So our first one, and I can't remember the date, was successful. There were some lessons learned. But the goal of that event is to move it away from, to have it be a community-wide event, so there is consistency about the information and experiences our parents have, lessen or like lighten the lift at the school sites, and then also like parents can know, pediatricians can tell, hey, first Saturday in May, big kinder roundup, get your kids there, and make it a big event. So that's our goal.
That's a win, yeah. We just got to do it at the
yeah.
other two transition
Right,
levels and do it
yes.
right.
Yeah, and I can have Christy do a report on our first one, so you can
That'd
kind
be
of get a
great.
sense of what the event was, and kind of her plans moving forward. But I think we're on the right track with that one.
Yeah.
It just needs to be, the more times it's kind of like the Holocaust Museum at McLaughlin. They've done it for decades, right? So everyone knows about it, everyone goes, and anyway. So, we want that event to be
Yeah.
the same thing.
That's good.
Okay, so so if we put transitions, communicate transitions under that first one, is that fair enough to everybody? All right. We've talked about facilities and potentially combining those 4 that are listed under facilities. And that would be somewhat of a continuation of our facilities plan already, or maybe these things will fall out of our current facilities plan. Equity, I think, is one that's going to kind of stand by itself. Now, some of these others might be rolled into equity. Substitute compensation. And we've got the assessment and parent-teacher conferences, basically communicating to parents the progress their students are making. All right. Increase high school credit opportunities at the middle school. Is there any that we could combine with that one? Is that
I mean,
kind of
there's several, I don't know that we want to combine them, but there's several that are increasing opportunities. They may not we may not need to combine them, but.
I think there's more to that than just that, though. I think we need to be very careful about, okay, what can our kids at the middle school do at a high school level? What are they capable of doing? And so when we do go to implement more credit opportunities, we are assured that our kids are going to be able to be successful in those.
Okay. All right, and here's a kind of another opportunity one, but this would probably be maybe at every grade level, but probably more at the elementary level where students they're combined by grade, and if they're advanced in a certain subject, but the ensure students have mastered, or that have mastered grade level standards have access to extended learning opportunities.
And I feel like that falls under equity, but I guess it depends on what we.
I mean, that could go with the support with testing.
Yeah,
Because
that's
the
what I thought,
testing
too.
is just a few day thing, but this
Same
other
idea.
one is the entire year. If a kid knows a standard or knows how to read or do their ABCs going into kindergarten or whatever it is, give them those opportunities instead of continuing to grind on them on stuff that they've already mastered.
So how, yeah,
Yeah, I had the same thought as Scott, is combining those two. I mean, they're pretty much the same ideas.
which one, that one?
The
and-
one you just read on the support with testing. The idea is that we are, and this falls into equity, this idea of helping all students progress so that we don't hear students say, well, testing was for 2 weeks and I finished every day, and so then I sat around for hours.
Yeah, I look at that a little different. So I think we need to fix testing so that we're not testing all day for 2 weeks. That's,
And we've tried, right? Oh, and even since I've been on the board, we had this huge, long evaluation. They gave out this big chart, and we did diminish. And I agree. I would love to get rid of all the or at least pare it way down. But
Yeah,
we
the
did
work
that.
of-
We did that
yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah,
Which,
the work of the assessment task force was really powerful, and they did an incredible job in paring down those. We kind of tried to get twofers, if the state's requiring X, then if we do this one, that meets double requirements so that you're limiting testing. I think that is a broader legislative priority. I mean, I think we've worked within the framework that we're mandated. We're as efficient as we can really get there, I
Yeah.
think. It's more of, we've identified, I don't know if we identified it with the language of delinking, but that was kind of the concept. And so I think that needs to, my recommendation would be
Yeah, I agree.
continue to push on that.
I think it's a legislative
Yeah.
issue. Really, it's the SBA now, and they keep changing the name so that maybe we don't get as mad about it. I mean, I don't know, why couldn't it be SBAC when now it's just SBA? It's just ridiculous.
no,
But
consortium.
it goes on for so long, they can take it as long as they want. Legislatively, we need to make that, I think, a time test, because that shows, anyway, and it just needs to be 1/10 of what it is right now.
No,
You don't
I-
need that long.
So is it legislation that these kids get as long as they want or need to take this test?
But yeah, that's the
Yeah.
standard. We
Yes.
can't change that unless the state, national, changes that rule.
It's
You've got to be
pretty
kidding me.
scripted, the way the rules around administration of the test, so that people statewide or nationally are administering the test the same way. And so it's very scripted. Teachers are trained. You stick to the script. You say the thing. You do, and you don't veer from that. And part of it is that kids have as much
Unlimited time.
Mhm.
And they can come back tomorrow
Mhm.
and try it again. Or he who was not there the first day, now we got to take another day to administer the test to him.
So, and going back to that first one, I think the reason I think that one's really important about ensure students who have mastered grade level standards have access to extended learning opportunities is because for several years, as a district, when we talk to people about having your kids tested for spectrum or something like that, the next words that come out of teachers' mouths or out of our mouths is, well, if you don't have them tested, they'll have the opportunity for enrichments in their class. And there's parents that have told me that, and so they don't have their kids tested. I didn't have my kids tested until this past year because I kept saying they're going to get that opportunity. They're going to get that opportunity. Well, and I don't put it on the teachers alone, because we haven't given them the resources. in some cases, to be able to recognize when their student needs those enrichments. And so it's like changing the culture and then also providing those resources, whatever the district thinks those resources are, to support the teachers with that. But I know that's kind of been our mantra is, you know, if you don't have your kids tested for a spectrum or whatever it is, then they'll get those enrichment opportunities in the class. And right now it's random as to which kids get that. It's based on the skill of the teacher in recognizing that their kids need that. So it's kind of a random act of a random occurrence.
All right, so we've got extended learning opportunities, both. So we can legislatively potentially make a pitch to modify the way that exam is administered, but that's going to be a big lift, I think.
Not only the way, but the intensity of the exam, the length of the exam. Does it really need to take as long as it does? It is going to be a big lift there.
Okay.
There's still things I feel like we can do at a school level to help alleviate some of the time in the classroom.
I agree.
All right, so I look at those as being different. I mean, they're similar, but I would say, I mean, these extended learning opportunities, that's probably all year long. If a student finishes early, he needs something else. We've got to have something in place to be able to keep our students challenged. Whereas the exams or the testing is, yeah, well, hopefully it's limited to a month or two.
I agree.
May. It's May.
Not that we couldn't say, look, we're going to focus on giving our students better opportunities, and here's two, we're going to lump into that, but.
And you know, I used to get really frustrated when teachers didn't challenge my kids because, you know, I don't even know how many times I was told, don't worry, the other kids will catch up as they grow older. And I'm like, so what do you want my child to do? Sit there and wait for the other kids to grow up? It was a frustrating thing to hear.
The other kids
But-
will reach his level
yes.
because he's not advancing.
Right. But, exactly. But
I've never heard teachers say that. That's kind of shocking.
do you know what, if you want, and to be honest,
Kind
I haven't heard it in this school district.
Okay.
And I've heard it multiple times, so I don't know if it was a cultural thing where I was before.
Yeah, right.
But that's what I was told repeatedly. So,
It's a silly
and the
thing to
problem
say.
is, after having a teacher perspective, after getting really frustrated, you know, some of these teachers are teaching 12 different levels in their classroom. And by law, the teacher has to focus on, you know, like when you make reading groups, the teacher is supposed to be with the lowest reading group. You know, when you do these things, it is just so difficult when you're just, especially in a situation where ours, we're just trying to get kids to perform at standard, to carve out a whole nother section and do that and do something. It would be nice if there were some more simple ways to help facilitate our teachers, to help facilitate kids learning that are beyond, because sometimes the teachers are teaching to the 30th percentile, because that's what most of the class is. And so, you know, being able to facilitate some of these other things, yeah, it would be great. I don't even know the answer to that one. It's tough. But it needs to happen. All kids deserve to be challenged.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly the greatest challenge in public education. You know, that it's just the variety of learning and the differentiated instruction and learning that needs to occur. I think that's really the greatest challenge we face.
And not to put a plug in for charter schools, but if you have charter schools that each had this is the way we're going to teach, and if your student fits this model, you get a choice and send him to that school. All right, so, having gone through that, we've all got some dots. I'm not sure if we're.
You know, I
ready to
honestly,
dot.
I'll admit I don't like dots, but to me, this is really kind of, through our discussion, we've really kind of identified the three areas. To me, it seems like, you know, some of these things, like the science one, we didn't get to that one yet, but to me, that's almost like legally, like, don't we just have to have all the equipment each class needs for the science, and if we don't, we should just purchase it? Like, you know, some of these I think naturally are just gonna need to happen, and they don't necessarily require a lot of time or effort. And through our discussion, to me, there's been things that have really come out that are kind of like the 3 or 4 areas of focus.
The problem
Oh.
is we're taking everything on this list and putting it in 3 or 4 areas, and I think we need to be really mindful of that. Not everything, but most everything.
Yeah, a lot of them we can cross
So-
out, and then we have Ms. Whitney, kind of pare that down a little bit. We kind of have which she's already kind of organized, and she can kind of determine and show us maybe what's the most reasonable amount and
So
in those areas.
How about if we do this? So we've identified, I think we kind of combined some. We can probably reorder this list so that those that are similar are in the same area.
Okay.
And we've got facilities up here. I'm just looking, STAR assessment, basically communication to the parents. We've got,
Well, I think
middle
the
school
facilities,
credit.
the facilities part there is part of what your long-range planning group is supposed to be doing, correct? So that isn't part of the board, that's part, well, I mean, it is, but it's part of what your long-range planning is supposed to be doing.
I agree. We've already done the facilities. I think some of these things are in play, and I think we can ask maybe that they come up with some of these things, but I think the facilities should be,
So that's part
So-
of what your group is doing.
yeah.
Here's what I would suggest, and I think, I haven't talked to Michelle about this, but if we can, so we've had some discussion here on some of these things. I think if we give Michelle an opportunity to kind of group these into things that would be similar, and then give us just a skeleton of what you think that body of work would be and how big it is. And then, because I don't know that we can do all of these, certainly
No.
without knocking something else off that you guys are working on. So
It would be resource loaded.
yeah.
I love that one.
So if you could go through and say, okay, these are things, I mean, so live streaming board meetings, that's something, we're going to discuss that. The science equipment, that's probably, but these others, if you could kind of group them and say, this is kind of how I would envision this happening. So for example, we've got the extended learning opportunities, and then we've got the way that we're administering exams. I can see this being like this, and this is going to take this much of our time. Does that sound fair to you?
And then plug it into your whatever that chart was on how many hours per day or per week. I'm not sure how that went.
And
so
I
that we
wouldn't.
know what this is going to take.
And I wouldn't see it as, and maybe it's just me here, seeing how many hours it's going to take in Michelle's time. I would think our resource load would be more like, this initiative here is going to take 2 quarter-time FTEs, and I don't have that in that department right now. This is going to
Yeah.
take, I don't want to know how many hours it's
Yeah.
going to take her. I want to know how many
Right.
FTEs in a department
Right.
and what
Exactly.
department's
Yeah,
going to
that's
work
exactly.
it.
Like the facilities, like you mentioned, if Dr. Reyes is already working on that, some of those things they can just add and make sure that they just kind of incorporate that into their discussions. They already have their meetings planned. They're already underway with that. Before I forget though, do the students have anything to add? We've just been so excited about our discussion today. Anything extra? Because I know they had things to add last time to our discussion. And if not, that's okay too. But we've just been really into this, so.
Yeah, anything that we've talked about that you guys have thought, man, if I could say something.
No, I think we should put a little bit of pressure. We would love to know your opinions. What do you think could help students more? What do you think could be most effective?
Tell us
for
about
time
your
to focus?
great experience with testing.
So anything, and you don't have to do testing. It's your choice. If you want to, great. But what do you think?
Something that really caught my attention was how you said that students really do get their schedules a week before school starts, so they really don't have a voice or a saying in, this class, I didn't want this class. Can you possibly change it into something else? My little sister started middle school today, and she got her schedule and noticed that she was in band, and she did not want band. So, that was really interesting how she's just like, I didn't know I was going to be in this class. Why did I get this class when I didn't have a choice in what I wanted? So I think it'd be interesting to before, they go from elementary school to middle school, that not only the students get to, have a choice in what they have, but also let the parents know what they can possibly have.
And I build on that. My daughter also is just started 7th grade today, and she picked her schedule up last Wednesday or whatever the day was. And she brings it home, and I go, "What is this?" Because some of them say enrichment. And she goes, "Well, I think it's shop class." And I go, "What's this other one?" And she goes, "I think it's ASB." And I go, how do you get those? How long did you ask for shop last year? And she goes, "No." And I go, "Does everybody take shop during the year?" And she goes, "I don't know." And I go, "What are the other enrichments that you're going to have next?" She goes, "I don't know." I go, "How long does an enrichment last? How many weeks?" "I don't know." And me as a parent, me as a school board member, I don't know.
And I'm kind of in the same boat, even though I know how it works, and I know a little more than that because I've had so many students go through McLaughlin. I still have questions. So yes, I think we can improve on that communication.
For me, it would be the STAR assessment. So me, I didn't have to take the STAR assessment, but my brother and sister have to and had to. And I remember like my dad coming home, he's like, "What's your teacher talking about?" Because they had teacher conferences. And he was like, "Rolando, what is your teacher talking about when if this score goes up, then they can put you in this class, but it's because you're in this class because your score on this, when it's a totally different like standard on the test." And same with my sister, because my sister, she struggles in reading a lot, and so she would be in a reading enhancement. And so they were telling her, like, at McLaughlin, there was like a reading for success class, and they were telling her, "Oh, sweetie, if on the STAR test, if you get this, and this, then you can be moved into a different class." And she's only improving in like 1 or 2 things, and the other things aren't. And so, like, they feel like maybe that test doesn't even, like, what is it supposed to do for them?
Because the STAR test doesn't give you numbers in percentiles. It gives you these, what do they call them? Anyway, it's totally different, and you're right. We need to do something so that parents understand that, because I have a hard time understanding it, and I really made a point to understand it, and math is my background, and it's tough. So I think you're right, yeah.
I think an interesting concept too, and we'll get into it when we talk about equity, is that stuff like this parent communication can be considered equity, because some kids have parents that are going to go advocate for them, or sisters or brothers that have been through the program before and can give them the information and advocate for them. Some kids get that schedule on day one because their parents weren't able to go pick up the schedule early. Their parents are never going to look at their schedule. The kids don't know what's going on, and it might be that that kid needs a different class than what they have. And they're not, you're going in the transition, you're not going to go advocate for yourself. No one's going to advocate for you for that entire semester, or trimester. So you're sitting you're sitting in that class that you may or may not need, or may not be what's best for you, not because of anything, because of you don't always have those advocates, and different kids have different advocates and need different levels of advocate from the school district versus their parents, and that's the equity thing. Some kids need more advocates from the school district than others.
Yeah, I really think that they should have either somebody, before you get out of grade school, before summer starts, that you should have be with your parents, or have a night or afternoon or whatever it is to do your schedule for next year for middle school. And the same for high school.
Yeah, I agree. I think, having these large meetings is great, and that's a start, but I think the expectation should be that every student meets with the counselor to plan out, and the parent that meeting should be a personalized, okay, Mr. Lehrman, your daughter, Miss Lehrman, I'm here, I'm the school counselor, let's figure out what's going to work best. If you don't have that, I really don't see how you get to the best scenario. I mean, I honestly don't. From a big meeting with students, that's great, give them some information, but they take that home to their parents. But unless you actually sit down and talk about this together, I honestly don't think you'll be at the best scenario for your child. So it's going to be a big change of expectation.
And here's not to belabor the point, a random act of advocation is, we went to the generic thing for our kid, or for the 7th grade. Each kid can go and pick what classes they go to visit. This is in the spring. And my daughter says, "Well, I'm going to go to this FCLA." And she goes to the FCLA, and the lady in there says, "Oh, I teach ASB." and my sister or my daughter says, "Oh, I was in ASB, in 6th grade," and she goes, "Well, have your your principal or your ASB teacher go and write a letter because we're having principals and teachers write letters of who should be in there." So she went and asked for that, and she may be in ASB. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell from her schedule. But that's just a random act of her showing up in that one class and talking. Otherwise, she wouldn't have talked to her principal and had him, go advocate. And so it's just another part of that would help all kids to be on the same, not on the same field, but equitable field.
Okay. Oh, go
Kathy.
ahead.
I was gonna say along with the schedule line and like scheduling and applicating things, I've noticed, at least it's been my experience as a student, that counselors are more focused on the kids that have like missing classes or they have something incredibly wrong with their schedule, that it makes kids that have like the classes maybe they aren't interested in or that they aren't in their plan or their goals for high school. It makes it really hard for them to get into it, and like to the point where you kind of have to come up with a I don't know, like valuable excuse almost to get into the counselor's office before you can even do that. And I think that's like where part of advocacy is important, because I think oftentimes the kids that don't have the parents there that are like pushing like my kid needs this fixed often are just stuck with what they're given.
That is so true. There has been times when my kids can't see a counselor until I go in and then they're seen. So that is an equity issue.
Yeah, that, I don't know how we'd address that, but,
Yeah,
I mean, it would
just-
be nice if we could have one-on-one counselors, but yeah.
Well, just to say, I know we're running out of time, but just the equity issue, I think we all feel that's important, but to me, that's just a hard area of focus, because like, what are our objectives? And I don't know how to measure that, like, did we accomplish it? And what are we asking the superintendent to do? See, that's the kind of issue I have with equity. I think we all feel it's important, but give me the 5 bullets, what are the next tasks, and how are we going to measure that? And, it just seems like it's so, we all know it's important, but how are we going to measure that, and what are the objectives under equity? So that's my only issue with making that like a priority focus.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
the best thing with equity would be to go in and say, okay, this is the lens that we are going to translate everything in the district, and identifying the lens of what we in Pasco feel like equity is.
Yeah,
And
see, that's
I
what
think
I would agree. I
what
think we should
equity would
just.
be. It's not trying
Yeah.
to establish equity, it's define equity.
Right, and I agree, and we should just look at our priorities through that lens, more so than it's its own thing that we are focusing on, that all of these things that we're doing should
Right.
kind of look through that lens.
Right.
So
right, but-
Vanessa Quitos last year did an equity presentation for you after she went to the WASDA conference, and she very clearly and succinctly defined equity as every student getting what they need. And so, that's what I hear is kind of the underlying theme in all of the comments that you've made, is how do we ensure that every kid gets what they need?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that you get access to the counselor that you need to get your class regardless of the circumstance, right? Regardless of my schedule's broken, or I failed a class, or I need a more rigorous class because I have a very, high-reaching goal, right? All students should be able to get what they need, no matter what the circumstances are, right? So if we believe in 100% of our kids, then we have to create systems that ensure 100% of the kids get access to what they need.
I think part of the challenge is some kids, probably very few, are good at advocating for themselves. There's a bigger group that have parents that will advocate for them. But I bet the larger group has no advocate. They just get their schedule and they go to that class and they're just glad to be in class. And their teacher's glad to, well, maybe they're not glad to be in, but some of them. I hope that's a small group, but,
They're glad to see their friends in class.
But it might be
Every
that
kid's glad
group
to see
that
it.
needs,
So-
maybe a kid needs shop and nobody advocates, and that could actually keep that child in school because they have something they love.
yeah. So Alpha talks about her sister being in band, right? She's been in band before. It's not like she was just put in band and not been in band.
The elementary band teacher signed her sister up for band.
I-
That's how she
I'm-
got in there.
Exactly. And there's teachers that are watching these students, and hopefully every teacher says, look, this kid may not know it, and maybe his teacher isn't gonna, or his parents aren't gonna come and ask, but he needs to be in a higher math class. And, systematically, hopefully that's happening, but But not every kid has an advocate, and that's going to be the teacher and the principal, but there's going to be some that fall through the cracks if we don't.
If we don't
Have
establish,
those-
this is, I think, drives home the point that we're making, is that we need to establish a standard so to make sure that everyone, it's our role and duty to make sure everyone's getting what they need, whether or not they come from a single-parent home, they live with their grandparents, they have two parents that are, that are at the school every week advocating for, see, that's the
Right.
whole point, that we need to establish a system where that's the expectation, that every student is getting what they need because they have the opportunity to meet with the counselor, to review their schedule, to, no matter
Well-
what situation they're coming from, it's our
Yeah.
duty to make sure that that's going to happen.
And I think the challenge is, was it Cassidy was talking about, so, where parents come and they'll make sure their kids are in the classes that they feel their kids need, but then it's, okay, so these are the classes that are left. This kid may or may not be a good fit, but this class is available, so here you go, if he doesn't have an advocate. So, anyway, we are at 5:35, so do we have enough information to move forward? Michelle, you can
Yes.
take and put some things together from this, and just kind of give us a rough order of magnitude, how much time these things will take, and maybe give us your ranking of these.
Yeah, yep,
Okay.
I'm on it.
Does that sound fair, board members?
Sounds great.
I think this was
Fortunately-
a valuable conversation, so thank you for setting it up.
Fortunately, we don't have to have goals until January, not that we want to wait till
End of
January,
January.
but we have some
Got
time.
time.
So, okay, very good. So we will be back here at 6:30 for our regular board meeting.